All right, hi everyone. Hopefully the audio is working today. If you can hear me correctly, if you could um, just type in the chat function that you're able to hear. Um, at least I'm getting on my end that the audio is being picked up this time. Okay, awesome. So, hi everyone. My name is Casey Gallagher Schmitz, and I am broadcasting to you today from the beautiful Freiburg, Germany, where I have been spending my summer. And I want to welcome you to today's H1 India webinar. So today's webinar is focused on writing working papers and draft resolutions. I myself will be directing the International Olympic Committee, which is one of the economic and social councils at this year's conference. If you're watching, you're in my committee, I can't wait to meet you. If you're not in my committee, I still hope to meet you sometime, wandering around the halls of the conference. So today I'm just going to give a brief kind of 15-minute to 20-minute presentation about working papers and draft resolutions, and then open it up to questions, which you can submit using the chat function. So first of all, what is a resolution? So a resolution is kind of the goal and the product you're producing over the weekend at conference. It's an official action document that the committee uses to list all the action it believes should be taken to solve the problem of the committee. So for example, if you're in the Social, Humanitarian, and Cultural Committee, which this conference is focused on the rights of female prisoners, your draft resolution will list all the actions the Softgame Committee feels need to be taken to help address the problem of female rights, or female prisoner rights. So the debate all weekend is focused around offering ideas that will eventually be put into these draft resolutions. So the first step of writing a resolution is forming a block. So what a block is, it's a group of you and fellow delegates who all have similar ideas and want to work together. These usually form around the first day, between the first and second session. So first session, people will get up, give initial speeches, kind of give some of their ideas. Then you and the audience are kind of looking for delegates who have similar ideas to work with, and then you find them after a committee session and form blocks. And this is the group of people you're going to be working with all weekend to share ideas, write your draft resolution, argue for them, etc., etc. These, of course, are not set in stone. You are more than welcome to leave and join blocks as you would like. Blocks can also fall apart and rejoin at any point in the weekend. But it's usually helpful to have that set by the first night. So after you have your block formed, the first document that you're going to be producing is called a working paper. So what a working paper is, it's a very informal, there's no set structure, and it's just a kind of document that you and your block will use to communicate the interest of the countries in the block. So it just kind of goes over the broad themes of the solutions you're hoping to pursue. So for example, if you're in a committee on trade that's focusing on trade policy, one of your statements, or what are known as clauses, might just read that every developed country should reduce its tariffs to the lowest level possible. It's really short, simple. It doesn't really go into great detail or exactly how the committee wants to implement that, but just you think that tariffs should be lowered. So working papers are usually written during unmonitored caucuses and outside committee and submitted by the end of the second session or at the beginning of the third session. So usually you just write them in a word processor on someone's laptop, put them on a USB, and then hand them to the chair. Once the chair accepts them, then they'll be printed and given out to everyone at the committee, and then each block will have an opportunity to introduce their working paper, which is just they get up, read it through, talk about it, and then they have a chance to answer questions that other delegates might have. So then after all the working papers are introduced, we'll have time to debate them, kind of the strengths and weaknesses of each one, and then over the course of the 4th and 5th committee sessions, each block will need to expand their working papers into draft resolutions. So a draft resolution does have to follow a specific structure. That structure will be detailed in the guide to preparation, which will be put on the website before conference and also given to every delegate as they register. The format just details how to structure draft resolution, the grammar needed, et cetera, et cetera. All draft resolutions are put into 2 parts. The first part, the preambulatory section, is kind of the introduction. So it kind of discusses the broad, like it's your block's weighted to state its broad themes for the solution, reference relevant UN actions or past actions of the committee, any background information you think that the other delegates need before reading your resolution. And each clause in a preambulatory section needs to start with what's called a preambulatory phrase. So words like affirming, concerned, noting, just words that kind of, again, set up these big statements that kind of help set the tone of your resolution. So an example one, so last year we had a commission on science and technology, and one of the preambulatory clauses from the resolution it created was a noting further Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right to receive and impart information and ideas through any medium regardless of frontiers. So just a statement that, everyone has the right to access to media and knowledge, which just kind of sets the tone for the resolution. The second and more important part of the resolution is the operative section. So this is the section that details all the actions the committee is going to take to help solve the problem. So operative clauses begin with operative phrases like accepts, calls upon, instructs, like action words that or requesting action by someone, versus preambulatory clauses are more just kind of statements. So example from the Commission on Science Technology resolution is the committee recommends that a 3-level information interchange system be established on the national, regional, and international levels. Each operative clause then also goes into subclauses, which kind of further details the clause. Those don't really need to follow any set structure. They just have to be numbered. Unlike the preambulatory clauses, which are just kind of list. So once draft resolutions are written, they're again introduced and distributed to the committee. The writers will have another chance to come up and introduce them, answer questions, and then debate on them. After draft resolutions, there's one more step, and this is the amendment step. So after a draft resolution is submitted, other delegates can offer amendments, which are just proposing adding clauses, changing the language, or removing clauses to make the draft resolution more acceptable to more people. At H1 in India, all amendments are unfriendly, which means that anyone can submit them, and then each one will be voted upon individually. Some tips about writing a draft resolution. So it's really important that you stand out with your draft resolution. This is most typically done by having the most detailed and innovative draft resolution. So it's really important to do your research because the chair and other delegates will really know who knows what they're talking about. So the most detailed draft resolutions will be the one people reference more and kind of see as documents that are actually worth passing. It's important to use unique language, like especially in your operative clause words, just because the more unique your language, then it's going to stand out. So, instead of just using notes, you might use like notes alarmingly, which is a statement that's not really used much. So delegates will know, that's the draft resolution that used that really weird or funny word. Draft resolutions can also be named. So a lot of delegates try to have some kind of creative name so that kind of sticks in people's mind. And when you're writing in a block, for some tips for delegates is that you really want to be an active participant in writing. So you're proposing the language, the ideas, you're even physically writing it yourself. And in debate, before resolutions are submitted, it is really important that you really clearly articulate your ideas, because then once that idea is seen in the draft resolution, the chair and other delegates will know, oh, that was this delegate's idea, because I know since they mentioned it a few days ago. And then a final logistic note is that working papers and draft resolutions need a number of signatories. So a signatory is just a country signing on to a draft resolution saying that they think it should be debated. Unlike other conferences, there's no sponsors. So usually sponsors are the authors of the draft resolutions and signatories are just supporters of it. At H1 in India, everyone's a signatory. And a signatory just means that, again, you think it should be debated. It doesn't mean you support it, it doesn't mean you're going to vote for it, but just that you think there are ideas in the draft resolution or working paper that deserve to be put on the floor. And then as a delegate, you can be a signatory on as many working papers to draft resolutions as you would like. That's really just kind of the basics of working papers and draft resolutions. So are there any questions about any of the information I just said, or just kind of questions in general about what to expect for committee? If you have a question, you can write it in the chat function. Someone just asked about format for working papers. Again, so there's no set format for a working paper. Your chair will go into a little more detail about what to expect, but it's usually just kind of, again, a list of statements that kind of outline your framework of a draft resolution you want and general themes of the committee. Someone just asked if there are no friendly amendments. Correct, because so the difference between a friendly and an unfriendly amendment is a friendly amendment is an amendment agreed to by all the sponsors and just automatically added to their draft resolution. But since H1 India doesn't have any sponsors, we don't have any friendly amendments. So all amendments are submitted unfriendly, which means anyone can submit them, and then they will be voted upon separately before the committee votes upon the draft resolution. We have a question about block size, whether we should make small or big blocks. So usually there are a set number of working papers and draft resolutions accepted by the chair. So for example, they might accept 5 working papers and 3 draft resolutions. So that kind of limits the number of blocks that can be formed. It's really more important to have a quality block than a large block. So a lot of delegates who have really good ideas and are really actively engaged in the writing. Of course, a bigger block means will be easier to get the resolution voted on because you'll have more people supporting it, more people working on it. And in cases where you only have like 3 draft resolutions accepted, you will need only have 3 blocks. So if there's a 4th block of 10 delegates, that draft resolution probably won't get accepted. So there's really no perfect block size. Just keep in mind that there is a limit on the number of draft resolutions accepted. So if you're in one block, but that's huge versus another block that's smaller, but both resolutions are accepted and put on the floor, then the size doesn't really matter. It really depends on who's most persuasive and convincing other delegates to vote for them. Also, another note about logistics is that since there are more working papers accepted than draft resolutions, there is a process called merging that happens in every committee. So 2 of the working papers, so an example, if you have 5 working papers and 3 draft resolutions, 2 of the working papers will have to combine with other working papers to form one final draft resolution. This process is kind of a hallmark for MALUN. It can be very intense, but also very fun and really gets you involved in kind of negotiating with others. So in crisis committees, we're running a little differently. We only have, I think, one. And instead of writing working papers or resolutions, you'll have directives, which are smaller kind of action statements. They too only have signatories. There are no sponsors in any kind of document at H1 India. Your director might amend that, so ask him or her before committee starts, but in general, there are no sponsors. Someone asked about how, because we have no sponsors or designated authors, how the chair and the dais is going to know that you were a delegate that wrote a lot of it. So again, this goes back to being really concise in your debate, so that if you're a delegate and you're constantly mentioning a few really innovative or the same idea over and over again, then the chair will pick up on that, and then when they see it in the draft resolution, they will know that that idea is contributed to you. We will also have, each committee will have assistant directors who are kind of roaming around the committee room, especially during unmoderated caucuses, kind of keeping an eye on blocks and who's leading blocks and who are writing them. So there are ways that the chair will be able to tell who wrote what. So you shouldn't worry about not getting credit for what you did. There's a question about motion for entertainment. So this, some committees will, if they move particularly quickly, will have everything, all their business done by Saturday night. Or the fifth session. So the sixth session, which I think is Monday morning this year, we'll have like an entertainment session. So delegates just can show off their talents, just kind of have fun for a few hours since there's no more business of the committee done. So those motions will only be accepted after draft resolutions have been voted upon. And that's left up to each individual chair. Again, for anyone who's just joined us, feel free to use the chat function to submit a question either about the topic of this work or this webinar, working papers and draft resolutions, or just kind of conference in general, since it's only a week away. There's a question about when the H1 schedule is coming out. It should be coming out by the end of the week. That is a question for our lovely administrative staff. So you can email info@hnmunindia.org to get more information about that. But you should be receiving the schedule soon enough. Something also to note that as the working paper and draft resolution writing process is the bulk of committee, is really important to have fun with it. It's really important to be as inclusive as possible, really incorporating a lot of people's different ideas, and making sure that everyone is contributing to your block and no one feels like they're being shut out or that they're not really needed. Especially because that's just good for your block making policy, just because the more people who feel included in part of the block, the more likely they're going to vote for the resolution and get other friends involved in the process. So really make sure that you're being really inclusive, incorporating ideas, and if someone wants to incorporate an idea that doesn't really belong in kind of the framework of the draft resolution, helping them kind of reframe their ideas so that it works well with the other ideas offered. So there's a question about what clauses the resolution should address. There's really no kind of kind of like typical categories people talk about are like setting up commissions, different kind of councils, proposing regulations, sanctions, funding structures, telling developed countries or non-developed countries to do something particular. It's really however you think the problem should be solved. So, for example, so my committee, the International Olympic Committee, the resolution is essentially mending the Olympic Charter to make the Olympics more sustainable and more equal. So any clause in the draft resolution will be wording to change in the Olympic Charter, which is the governing document of the Olympics. Thing like requirements that bid cities will need to meet, and like other organizations that the Olympics should work with, governing boards or like councils that they want to set up within the Olympics to regulate certain things. Really whatever you think best solves the problem. So there's really nothing that the chair is looking for, but just something that is really really innovative and really tackles the problem. There's a question about minimum vote for passing resolutions. So every resolution needs to be passed with a majority vote. So at the end of committee, you'll enter a voting procedure and vote on all the draft resolutions that have been submitted. And then whichever one receives over 50% of the vote is adopted. Keep in mind though that once one resolution is passed, then the committee ends. So if you have 3 draft resolutions and the first draft resolution passes, then you won't even vote on the second and third draft resolutions. Also, that if all 3 draft resolutions were to fail, then the committee doesn't pass any draft resolution. You don't go back and try to vote on them again until one passes. So there's it's strategic about how you want to order draft resolutions, because if you think yours has a good chance of passing, then you really want to make sure it either goes first or goes last after the other 2 fail. Another note about when you should be writing working papers and draft resolutions. During committee session, you will have what are called unmoderated caucuses or unmods, which will be 15 to 20 minute breaks that you can meet with your block and start writing out wording for your draft resolution. Electronics aren't allowed in the committee room, but during unmoderated caucuses, you're allowed to go off into the hallway and start writing ones. And then most resolutions are written between committee sessions, during lunch, or at night during dinner and after dinner. During committee sessions, you should be working hard. You should be working on getting contact information like phone numbers or Facebook or whatever other communication app you use of other delegates in your block, so you guys can communicate outside of committee. Someone just asked a clarifying question about the voting procedure. So yes, you can't have 2 resolutions passing. You can only have one resolution pass and become official, because the resolution, when it passes, becomes official policy for the committee. So if you have 2 resolutions that are kind of contradictory, you can't have both pass. So only one resolution can pass, and once one passes, all the others are tabled and are not considered. There's a question about timing of sessions. Most sessions are usually 3 to 4 hours. I don't know the official schedule yet because it's still being worked out by our administrative staff. But they're usually long enough that you feel like you're getting really good quality debate, but not too long, so you have time outside committee to be working on draft resolutions and such. We had a question about merging, so if you were to introduce 2 draft resolutions and then want to merge them, That is, it depends on the chair. So once the draft resolutions have been introduced, they will still be distributed and debated upon. Before voting procedure is entered, though, the delegates can choose to merge the two. If like you only had two draft resolutions submitted and they're very similar, then they could be merged, so then only one's voted upon. But that's up to the discretion of the chair whether or not they have time for a merge to happen and how they want to handle that process. There's a question that if a resolution passes early, will session end early? So hypothetically, yes, that once a draft resolution is passed, but usually most chairs, so the committees have been structured so that won't happen, so there will be plenty of debate to be had. So most cases you'll be really rushing towards the end to pass something because you'll be having so much fun debating with each other and discussing issues at hand. And if for some reason a resolution did pass before the 5th or 6th session, then the chair will most likely, all the chairs also have other issues that they could bring up before the committee to have kind of more of a mini resolution pass. So that's definitely something not to count on or expect. That the committee will, or the weekend will be jam-packed with debate and issues. So don't worry about that. Another note about kind of the logistics of the draft resolution. So there's a few grammar things that you have to follow. This will be detailed more in your delegate handbook that you will see at conference. So if you've ever been in a monitoring committee, or if you've seen sample draft resolutions, you will see that all the preambulatory clauses are always italicized, and then the operative clauses are underlined. So that's just a way to kind of help signal to the reader where a new clause starts and what kind of clause it is. There's also a few things about how each sentence needs to end, like with a period or a semicolon. That will you can read about in your delegate handbook, but just something to keep in mind about the formatting of your draft resolution, because if they are incorrectly formatted, a director most likely will reject it. Ask you to rewrite it. Someone asked, what is crisis? So in the HMUN model, there are a few committees called continual crisis committees. So while a General Assembly or Economic and Social Council committee focus on one set issue all weekend and work to create one draft resolution solving that issue, a few committees are simulations of government agencies or board of directors or military cabinets, and instead are dealing with kind of a broad issue that require a number of solutions through the weekend. So for example, you might be a simulation of the Allied powers during World War II, and throughout the weekend you'll be responding to a number of crises that weekend. And in response to a crisis, so a crisis is an event that's not laid out in the background guide that's kind of sprung up on you during committee. So for example, again, if you're like the War Council for the Allied powers, then you might get a crisis that Germany has invaded Belgium, and then you as a committee need to respond to that crisis. And then how you respond affects the world the committee is in and other crises. And the goal of the committee is to end up in a better position than you started. So some delegates enjoy them because they're a little more fast-paced, a little more kind of role-play-y. Other delegates think they're a little too chaotic, so everyone kind of has their style. To my knowledge, I think there's only one crisis committee this year at HMUN India. It's the Constituent Council of Nigeria. So they'll be writing the new constitution for Nigeria. So, and they will have various crisis crises during the week and they have to respond to. So there's a question about will there be crises in normal committees? So for the IOC in particular, because we will be occurring during the actual Olympics, there most likely will be a few crisis elements kind of thrown in the mix. Most the General Assemblies and Economic and Social Councils don't have crises the same way. Usually they might have a crisis if debate is starting to kind of grind to a halt to spur debate, if there's too much consensus happening to kind of get a few more viewpoints in the mix. Really just any way to kind of help bring in points of topic that haven't been discussed or kind of help break points of consensus. So the International Olympic Committee will most likely have a few more crisis elements than normal just because we'll be bringing in actual crises as they happen during the Olympics. The other normal committees most likely will have a few elements just to kind of keep things interesting, but they won't. But the committee won't be responding to those crises in the same way. So they won't be writing directives or communiques. Instead, just the response to those crises will be reflected in the eventual draft resolution. And if the committee particularly likes crises, during most committee sessions, there will be a feedback session. So our Undersecretary General for committees will come in and ask the delegates how things are going. So that's definitely something to mention during those feedback sessions if you feel like you would like a few more crises to kind of deal with. Directors always have a few up their sleeve when ready. Again, anyone who's just joining us, feel free to ask questions about anything you have about writing working papers to draft resolutions in the chat function, or if you have any questions about the conference in general, as we're only a week away and this is one of the last webinars we'll be hosting. And again, as I'm the director of the International Olympic Committee or the IOC, if you also have any questions particularly relevant to that committee, I will be happy to answer them. There was a question about what the process is in when you're introducing working papers and draft resolutions. So typically you have a authors panel and a introduction phase. So when a draft resolution is brought to the floor, it'll be read out, and then a few of the signatories will be able to come up and just kind of briefly introduce it, talk about its main themes, what makes it unique, why delegates should vote for it. And then other signatories can come up and form a Q&A panel. So each other delegates not involved in the writing process will be able to ask questions about anything they think is relevant that the committee should discuss, and then the authors will be able to answer them. And then after that, we'll open up to more moderated caucus about specific ideas brought up in the draft resolution. Someone asked about awards. The specific number of awards depends on the number of the committee, so I can't give definitive answer, but in the economic and social council committees, there will, of course, be a best, an outstanding, and an honorable, and the numbers depend on the committee size. So that's something to ask about once you get to conference to our secretariat, who will give you more information. Someone asked about any tips about the IOC in general. So it's written in the background guide, the International Olympic Committee is a little different than most committees. So our committee technically doesn't have a working paper draft resolution phase. So the first four committee sessions will be the draft resolution, and the draft resolution will need to deal with, there are a number of issues about surrounding the Olympics that the background guide lays out. So the draft resolution will need to offer solutions to those problems, certain ways of amending the Olympic Charter, amending the way the Olympics are run, amending how the Olympics treat host cities, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last two sessions will be actually selecting the host city for the 2024 games. So given kind of the framework and the vision set forth in the draft resolution about how the Olympics should change and how future Olympics should be changed or run, then delegates will have to pick a host city that they think best amplifies or exemplifies that vision. So a city in a country that they trust to be able to implement those reforms. So tips for that committee, again, kind of general tips, be really substantively prepared because it will make A, debate more interesting, and B, it will help you kind of lead blocks in the committee because people know that you really know what you're talking about and that you can help kind of shape and lead the direction of the committee. Really feel free to, it's totally okay to be for something and against something. So even if you're getting up and giving speeches or part of your draft resolution is specifically advocating against something, so against another policy proposal or against another draft resolution, so it doesn't all have to be, this is what we think is right, but also this is why we think you're incorrect. That kind of will make you stand out a little more and also liven up debate a little bit. And then also have some host cities in mind going into committee because that part of the committee will be a little more creative. Delegates will have the opportunity to create PowerPoints or whatever presentation they feel help best communicates why their city should be selected. So just prepare to be a little creative. There's a question about working with countries that in the real world don't have the best diplomatic relations. So as this is a simulation of the actual UN, you do want to remain on policy and in character. So usually, the delegate from Israel most likely will not be writing a resolution with, the delegate from Iran. But if whatever the issue is being discussed, for some reason those two countries are actually in agreement, and it makes sense for them to work together, that's totally fine. You won't necessarily get any kind of special consideration or reward if for whatever reason your bloc has historic adversaries in it. So if you're India, you're working with Pakistan, you're not the judge or the chair isn't necessarily going to look favorably upon that because they're just look at and make sure that what you eventually created was really substantively on point, and that you guys were being active participants in committee. So it's more important that if you are working with a kind of, again, a historic adversary, that it makes sense you're working with them instead of just because you think it will look good to the chair. Someone asked about research for their country in the International Olympic Committee. So because as a delegate, you can kind of look at yourself as both a representative of both your National Olympic Committee and also your country's government. So because most National Olympic Committees aren't in the news very much, you might not be able to find a lot of policy on them. So in cases where your National Olympic Committee hasn't really had any kind of statement or official policy position,
then you can just go off your country's policy. So what is your country's relationship with like human rights? How do they think they should be addressed? How do they solve them? Like how do they think violators of human rights should be punished? So you can think of yourself more as a representative of your government and following their policy positions. So in your research, it's totally fine if you're looking more into what your country's government has done in addressing the issues in the background guide versus necessarily your National Olympic Committee. Someone asked about whether we have debate or discussion. So it won't be a formal debate, like one affirmative, like one pro and con, where you're going back and forth. It's more, in moderated caucuses, will be every moderated caucus will, for example, be 10 minutes with 30 seconds speaking time. So you will have 20 speakers in succession, each talking about a certain issue. So you might have a moderated caucus on how many prisoners should be in each cell in a female prison. So then each speaker will give their opinion. They can comment on other people's speeches or address other delegates, but it won't be a formal debate in the sense that you will be going back and forth. Someone asked about what is done in the first committee session. So the first committee session it's where you kind of establish yourself as a delegate. So you introduce yourself, you kind of give some of your main points and the main solutions you are hoping to pursue. You kind of state your general overview of the problem and what needs to be solved. The point of this is so that other delegates know that you're someone that's in agreement with them, so that they can seek out, inform, block, and work with. So it's really important, and it's totally fine to come up with prepared speeches, have notes in your hands, whatever method helps you or makes you more comfortable in speaking. You don't need to memorize anything or like just come up with stuff on the top of your head. So kind of before committee session is totally fine to kind of really think about how you're going to present yourself, so that other delegates know that you're someone that they want to work with throughout the weekend. Someone asked about specific moderated caucus topics in the IOC. So, for example, you might offer a moderated caucus on the requirements for built I propose a moderated caucus on how many new stadiums the city is allowed to build, or how sustainable, like the sustainability standards for new stadiums, or how the IOC deals with countries who have violated human rights, or countries that have been found to have doping, athletes who are doping, or et cetera, et cetera. So really any kind of specific topic you think that deserves a lot of discussion upon. So the background guide details a lot of different topics, so every kind of point made in that background guide can be a potential moderated caucus. Someone asked a question about the speakers list. So at the beginning of the committee, before you move into moderated caucus, you'll have a speakers list. So the chair will open it up, ask for speakers, and it's the kind of first chance you have to talk in committee and introduce yourself. So the speakers list, its topic is just kind of the topic presented in the background guide, and it's a way, again, for your delegation to introduce yourself, your statement of the problem, what you're hoping to solve, solutions you're hoping to pursue. The default is 1 minute speaking time. You can definitely propose motions to increase it or decrease it, to usually down to 30 seconds or up to 90 seconds. It's up to the chair's discretion whether or not they want to entertain that motion, just because it's really important that we have as many people speaking as possible. So the longer the speaking time, usually the less number of speakers. So that's definitely a motion you could propose, but it might be ruled dilatory by the chair. Usually a speaker's list isn't returned to in committee. It's returned to if there's no moderated caucuses being proposed, but usually it's only used in the first hour or so of committee. Someone asked about, do they need to talk about their country's views, or can they talk about their own perspective? So as a delegate, you are representing your country. So your views are your country views. So if I'm the delegate from Germany, then I'm talking about Germany's views and Germany's proposed solutions. I wouldn't be talking about my personal beliefs as Casey, because that's not really the point of the simulation. So it's totally fine if you want to talk about your personal views outside of committee to friends you're making in committee, but in the speakers list and also moderated debate, stick to your country's policies and your country's solutions. Someone asked what happens if your speech exceeds the speaking time. So every director will have a stopwatch and a gavel with them. So they'll give you a quick tap when you have 10 seconds left, and then we'll gavel you down when your speaking time is elapsed. So that will be made very clear so you know when you need to end your speech. And each director has a different style about how they handle it. So they'll communicate it to you during the first committee session, and if you have any other lingering questions, make sure you ask them. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. So if there are any final questions about writing working papers or draft resolutions, or any kind of questions about conference in general, please submit them. Someone asked who was the first speaker in the speakers list. So at the beginning of committee, when the speakers list is opened, the chair will ask for speakers, and then they will call upon delegates at random. So there's no set speaker, it's whatever delegate is called upon first by the chair. Okay, so that brings an end to this webinar. Thank you guys so much for joining. Just as a recap, this webinar is about writing working papers and draft resolutions. So a recap of the tips that we mentioned throughout this webinar is to really make sure that you're as substantively prepared as possible. The more detailed and innovative your draft resolution is, the more it will stand out, the more delegates will want to support it, the more likely it will pass. Try to have creative language and creative names for your draft resolutions to really so they stick out in the chair and the delegate's mind, and really take time to write them. A reminder that there's no pre-written work allowed in HM in India, so all writing and language needs to be produced during committee. So you can't write operated clauses or preambulatory clauses before committee session and bring them in. It's obvious to the chair and the dais staff if you did do that, and that is grounds for expulsion from the conference. So really make sure that you're writing everything in committee session. You're working with a lot of people and really trying to be inclusive and collaboratory as possible, because that's going to make the process more fun for everyone. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to email or administrative staff at info@h1india.org. You can also email me personally at ioc@h1india.org. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next week in Hyderabad.